Good evening, everyone. And as Payal said, thank you very much for being this enthusiastic on a weekday. And of course, in addition to Payal and me, there's Neena, Anjali, Shuli, and Ritu, who join both of us in welcoming you here today. There's some of you who are new here today, and while we were having drinks, some of you asked, why do you call this club Algebra? The idea actually came up with a friend who's in the audience, but it has a beautiful meaning, and it's got nothing to do with the terror of math that we've all suffered. It really means the science of restoration and balance. And to a large extent, that's what's been our attempt over this last year, to host conversations that allow for the possibility of balance and of restoration of some degree of civility and dialogue, and the possibility of courteous dissent. And many of you are regulars here, and you know that we've had a fair share of that, the space for courteous dissent and disagreement. The other thing, of course, is the ever-present dragonfly, which many of you ask about, and that too has a lovely meaning because it means the possibility of emotional and mental transformation rather than the pulverizing power of violence or of shouting high decibels. So all of that, we hope, Algebra embodies, and certainly your presence here has helped us create a community that is very wedded to the idea of dialogue and conversation, and so really another thank you for that. So first up this evening is somebody who really is, I wouldn't say the master of conversation, because if a barbecue skewer morphed into a man, then you would get somebody called Karan Thapar. Of course, he's won every award that's possible, so I'm not going to bore you with it about the great presenter that he is, the acumen that he brings to his interviews. But what's much more telling is that he's had the singular feather in cap to have Mr. Modi, Jayalalithaa and Ram Jethmalani walk out on him. You know? So it would be delightful to have a man who's been dissecting public life and public figures at the end of one's hands to dissect him. But unfortunately, I have to put in a caveat, there's not much we can pin him down on, because he lives a pretty blameless life, a life of privilege, likes his mummy very much, and doesn't socialize on Sundays. So really, that's the worst one can pin him down for. I do have one explosive thing on him, which we'll bring into the conversation later, but unfortunately, otherwise, this is merely going to be a perspective conversation and a very soft conversation with a very hard man. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Karan Thapar. So Karan, as I said, first, thank you for venturing this far. I have an explosive secret on you, which I'm going to share with our audience later in the interview. But first up, the soft stuff. You know, when we invited you here, and I was asking you to pick a few things that we could show on screen, you picked Hamid Ansari, Mr. Modi's interview, and Kapil Dev's interview as being symptomatic of your career. Why did you pick these three?
I'm not sure whether symptomatic is the right word, but there were certainly moments in my career that attracted attention, got talked about, have been remembered by people, and I thought that if you showed them, it might be interesting for the audience to hear you question me about them. I would say symptomatic of my career is simply the sort of plodding interview you do every day because the news event has happened, because you need to get further. These three were special moments for different reasons, but not symptomatic.
So when you call yourself the plodding interviewer, you do know that you're veering dangerously into being a politician who talks crap, right?
I suppose it must be infectious because I do so much talking with politicians. I've probably acquired the art, I hope, of being able to speak a lot and say very little. Something I admire about politicians is that they can keep speaking. There's absolutely no content to what they're saying. They are unabashed about it, and you can't quite understand when they're going to stop. So I'm trying that trick on you.
Okay. So let me veer back to the question I asked you. What about that Modi interview where he basically pulled the mic off on you? What did that teach you about interviewing people? And did you get that first frisson of fear that many others have subsequently felt while crossing Mr. Modi?
No, I didn't have any frisson of fear, I have to be honest with you, because actually Mr. Modi was a perfect gentleman whilst being an extremely uncooperative interviewee. He is a superb PR gentleman, and when I landed in Gujarat, Ahmedabad that morning around 9 in the morning, the first thing that happened was I got a phone call on my mobile from Mr. Modi to say, "Aa gaye?" And I said, हाँ Mr. Modi, how do you know? He said, मुझे पता था पहुंचने वाले हो, तो मैंने सोचा मैं तुम्हारा स्वागत तो करूं, आखिर पहली बार आ रहे हो अहमदाबाद, कभी पहले आए हो? मैंने कहा जी अहमदाबाद कभी नहीं आया हूं, लेकिन जामनगर आया हूं. He says, चलो शाम को मिलेंगे, जल्दी आना, चाय पियेंगे इकट्ठे. So I turned up a little bit ahead of time and we had a cup of tea. He was extremely friendly and chatty, except when we sat down, when the questions began, he was initially, I think, upset because he didn't think I'd begin with 2001. He must have thought I'd get to 2001, 2002, but not immediately. If I recall my first question, and I'm saying it from memory, so forgive me if I've got it slightly wrong, but it was to say to him, Mr. Modi, you're 6 weeks away from your second election. India Today magazine and the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation think you're the best chief minister in town, but perhaps 100 million Muslims tend to look upon you as a mass murderer. Do you have an image problem? Perhaps on reflection, that might have been a bit blunt. I think I'm prepared to answer your question by saying that there's a more tactful way of approaching the same subject.
In the decade that's passed, have you learned tact?
Learned means, have I learned to be tactful? I've learned many occasions when I should have been tactful, but always in retrospect.
Okay. So let's move to the Kapil Dev interview and the Hamid Ansari interview.
But can I finish a story about the Modi interview before it?
Yes, yes.
When the interview ended, and remember it lasted for roughly 2.5 or 3 minutes, he didn't actually walk out. He said, "Mujhe pani chahiye." मैंने कहा जी आपके बगल में पड़ा. And he said, "नहीं." He took his mic off, but he didn't move. So I then spent the next 45 minutes politely, I thought persuasively, but very persistently, trying to say to him, "Aap interview khatam kariye." I'm quite happy to reverse the order of questions. They don't, this little 3-set question that came at the top can go at the bottom, because actually I wasn't going to go on about 2002. But he wouldn't accept. In between, he insisted I have tea. He brought out dhokla and a whole lot of mithai. So I was being fed by Mr. Modi, almost spoon-fed by Mr. Modi. ये भी खाइएगा, वो भी खाइएगा. ये बिल्कुल गुजराती चीज़ है. आपने कभी नहीं खाई ना, खाइए. And I'd say, हाँ मैं ज़रूर खाऊंगा जी, लेकिन आप इंटरव्यू तो करिए ना, please. सिर्फ 15 मिनट के लिए. मैं ऐसे करूँगा, वैसे करूँगा. But it didn't work. And an hour later, I said to him, "Forgive me, Modi Saab. Now I'm out of time. I've got a plane to Delhi, so I'm off." So he said, "Chaliye ji, no problem." The next day, as I had said to Mr. Modi, if you give me a 2-minute interview, Rajdeep, who is the editor of the channel, will run it in the news every single bulletin. If you do the full interview, it'll be shown once, repeated once, and forgotten forever. But 2.5 minutes with you walking out will be shown 36 times and remembered. And the next day, he rang me and he said, "मेरे कंधे पे बंदूक रख के गोली मार रहे हो?" मैंने कहा, "जी, मैंने आपको कहा था ये होगा." He said, "चलो छोड़िए." And I swear to you from my memory, his words thereafter were as follows. "Karan, मैंने phone किया to tell you, I love you, brother." Those were his exact words. जब मैं दिल्ली आऊँगा.
This is before he met Obama. He knew how to say, "I love you, brother."
He did indeed. He did indeed. He also knew how not to mean it, which is more important, right? He said to me, "I love you, brother. और जब मैं दिल्ली आऊँगा तो हम भोजन करेंगे." I'm not sure of the love. I've never met him thereafter. I don't think I've even been in the same room as him, and 10 years have passed. And bhojan ke liye to unhone mujhe kabhi nahi bulaya.
So, Karan, we're going to veer back to the Modi conversation in more substantive and serious way in a little while. But before that, much more quickly than this anecdote, how about Jayalalithaa? You know, why have so many strong-willed, powerful people been so pissed off with you? Why did she end her interview with saying, "I didn't enjoy this interview with you," and you had really reached out and said, "I loved talking to you," and she said, "I'm not sure I did."
Her exact words were, I put out my hands and I said, "Chief Minister, a pleasure talking to you." Instead of shaking my hand, she did namaste and she said, "Frankly, it wasn't a pleasure speaking to you." The problem began when the interview was about to start. It was in Fort St. George, where her office is, up on the top floor. It was freezing cold, because apparently instructions are given that the room temperature has to be 15 degrees. Jayalalithaa liked it that way. And on the table where we were to sit was a huge flower arrangement, which meant that I could either see the flowers, but not the lady behind that I was interviewing. So as soon as I walked in, I picked up and I moved them. And her chief secretary came running and said, no, 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 you can't. Madam has insisted the flowers are there. So I said, well, Madam may insist the flowers are there, but I can't see Madam's beautiful face. Sorry, Madam's beautiful face. And I'd rather look at Madam than the flowers. So I just picked them up and I moved them aside. And shortly later, Madam walked into the room and the chief secretary went running to complain about what a naughty boy I'd been. And she certainly looked daggers at me. And I said to her, with all the false charm that I could gather, I said, how can I sit on a table across one of the most beautiful women in the country and look at flowers instead?
You did not say that, Karan.
I did, I promise you. I promise
The things
you.
you'll say to get an interview.
It sounded horribly unctuous and totally untrue, but I have to tell you, the big smile on her face suggested she'd heard it before and she believed it. But once the interview began, I realized the flowers were there not to distract my view of her beautiful face, but to hide the fact that she actually had 4 or 5 sheets of paper on which answers had been written. Now, in those days, chief ministers would say, can I have questions in advance? And you had a straight choice. Either you give questions and get the interview, or you don't give questions and you don't give the interview. But I thought there's a third alternative. Give questions and don't ask them. So I gave her the questions that I thought you expected. She had copious answers for those, and I had a completely different set that I gave. So as I was asking questions, she was furiously looking through these things because she couldn't find the question I was asking and where the answer was. And every now and then she sort of found an answer that she thought half matched the question I'd asked, and she'd flip to that. While this was happening, I said to myself, it's also being filmed, and the BBC are going to wonder what the hell's going on over here. So I said to her, with all the innocence I could muster, you're reading your answers. And she said to me, but you've got questions you're reading. I said, it's okay for me to read my questions. You can't read answers you made up. Anyway, we got off to a very bad start. And as a result, when the interview ended and I put out my hand and I said it was a pleasure to meet her, she did namaste and said it wasn't. And then she turned around and sailed off like an armada.
Okay, and we're going to move on to other stuff very quickly, of course, because we are going to have a session on cricket after this, that the Kapil Dev interview was really epochal. And, you know, I wanted to lead on from this to ask you that one of the hazards of interviewing people is that quite often you can end up liking your subjects, you know, and even when you're politically not aligned or even if you're skewering them for public, you might end up liking them and becoming friends. And I'm going to come to that. But what about the Kapil Dev interview? You know, the country was divided on the fact that he broke down. Many people felt it was stage managed and many were heartbroken that an icon of the nation was moved to tears like that. What did you feel being the person who brought him to tears?
Do you want the truth or do you want a polite answer?
Well, clearly, given that you've been ferreting truth out for 20 years, we want the truth.
But the truth is that any interviewer interviewing a celebrity, the more important the celebrity, the bigger the feeling I'm going to describe ends up being, is that you want to see them distraught and in some sense made to cry. It's a horrible feeling of schadenfreude, which is why I said, do you want the truth? But obviously, if your interviewee starts crying in front of you, the thought that goes through your mind is, hallelujah, this is unexpected, it's unprecedented. And the third thought was, please let him not stop. And the problem was that if it was a 25-minute interview recorded without a break, because the BBC doesn't have commercial breaks, and I think I'm right in saying Kapil started crying somewhere in the 11th minute. And it was perfectly genuine tears. They were not put on because his voice was breaking, his nose was running, he was constantly doing this to wipe his nose, and I said to myself, and this is a pretty heartless thing to say, so you'll think awfully of me, but you are getting the truth. This is incredible, I said to myself. How do I carry on and make sure he doesn't stop? There are 15 minutes more, and it'll be an incredible anticlimax if after 5 minutes of bawling like a baby, he cheers up and starts grinning and smiling. And I said, yet, I can't make a heartless monster of myself because I have to
Even
continue.
Even though my internal monologue exactly is that.
And probably most people think I'm a monster too, but I can't give them proof of it. So I said, I'm going to make my voice as soft and gentle as I can possibly manage. Let my tone sound nice, but let the questions continue to be hard and brittle. And that's exactly what happened. And we managed to keep Kapil crying for 15 minutes. And when the interview ended and the lights go off, because that's what used to happen, I put out my hand. Fortunately, we were off air, and I said, "Thank you, Kapil. That was a great interview." And his answer was, "It may be great for you, but my life is destroyed." And I suddenly realized, my God, in my stupidity, I've actually said the wrong thing. I've revealed to him that I'm so happy he carried on crying. But the funny thing was, when it ended, he also had probably gone through a cathartic experience. He sat and had coffee with me and my crew for a good 40 minutes, and he was a different man. He wasn't, I won't say he was laughing, but he was cheerful, he was chatting. He chatted about his crying. He said that, will people think it's done artificially? And I said, no, no one possibly can. And the one secret I'll share with you is all of this happened without Kapil wearing trousers. He had shorts on.
Well, Karan, I mean, I think you've been very honest about the kind of vulturous glee with which one skewers people, and I've used that word for.
And let me tell you, every single journalist, if he was being honest, would also admit to it. Because there's no way that when you do that sort of interview, you aren't aware of the fact that this is an unprecedented moment in front of me. And certainly there are qualms in your mind, and you say to yourself, I shouldn't be so heartless, I shouldn't be so selfish, I shouldn't be so horrible. And the other half of you says, this is my job. This is my job. I'm simply asking the questions, and if he's going to carry on crying, then that's for him to answer.
Sure. In anticipation of meeting you, I did look at that interview again, and I was part of a journalistic outfit that had some role to play in getting him into that studio with you and being in that distraught place. And I must say, it's like 16 years later that one felt quite a qualm, because like you said, the tears seemed very genuine, and looking at the history of what he had done, to watch him break down like that, I must say I had a journalistic moment of great disquiet seeing that again 16 years later in retrospect. But let me move on, Karan, that, the question I was asking you, that very often you might end up liking your subjects, or you may be friends with them, or certainly belonging to the ecosystem that you do, you're very often interviewing people that you like. Has there been a conflict of interest in your life ever that you will share with us? I know of one where I think you interviewed Mr. Advani after his, when he had spoken about Jinnah in Pakistan, and he wanted that interview redone or repositioned, and you refused, and you lost a friendship by doing that. Have you had other incidents like that where there's been a conflict of interest?
Can I begin by answering about the Advani interview? Because I think that's perhaps another learning experience. Somewhere before that interview happened, it happened in 2006, I had become aware of the fact that actually I had established a relationship with Mr. Advani that went beyond journalist and Home Minister or Deputy Prime Minister. And I was also aware of the fact that he readily gave me interviews when I asked. The very first interview he gave to sort of prove that point when he became Home Minister, delivered on his first day in office, because if you remember, his actual first day, he flew to South India for that communist leader's funeral. So his second day was his real first day, and he began the day by giving me an interview. That should have conditioned me when he said to me at the end of this interview, "Ye mujhe acha nahi laga, phir se kar lo." There are, to be honest, occasions when people have said, "Ye mujhe acha nahi laga, phir se kar lo," and I've said to myself, I can devise a way of redoing it where none of the sting is left out, but perhaps they'd feel happy, and I've done it. But on this occasion, I don't know why, but I didn't. He then rang up Rajdeep to say that Karan's show is on your channel, can't you speak to him? And Rajdeep rang and said, "Soch lo, yaar." And I said, "No, Rajdeep, I can't see any reason." And it wasn't really about what you thought it was about. It was a set of questions which said, the new president of the party, who I think was Rajnath Singh, has in critical areas reversed policies or positions that you'd taken. And therefore, are you being marginalized? You were the man who founded this party, and on critical issues, and there were 4 or 5 of them, Rajnath Singh has taken completely opposite positions, or at least very different positions. He didn't like it. He didn't really wish me to change the thrust, but perhaps the sharp manner in which I was pitting him against Rajnath, he wanted that toned down. And I felt no reason to do it because I thought I'd asked a serious set of questions that to me were relevant and were an issue of importance. And even if the press hadn't brought it up, I felt it was my duty to do so.
So Karan,
and I stuck to that. And as a result, lost a friendship.
You know, you just said that we'll move on from here very quickly, and I do need you to speak faster because you would never allow anyone on your sets to speak this slow, Karan.
I'm terribly garrulous, I do apologize. There's no person you'll ever meet who's more loquacious than me.
Okay. So you just said that you've redone or redevised interviews a couple of times when people have requested you. Veer Sanghvi pretty much lost his public reputation for sending a questionnaire in advance. You know, I think it was to Mr. Ambani, wasn't it?
I honestly don't know.
But, you know, in that entire Neera Radhya tapes, that became a big flashpoint that he had sent an advance copy of questions. So now when you're saying that you've done public interviews, you have this great reputation for being somebody who pins people in the corner, and they've asked you to redo interviews and you've agreed. How does that pass muster?
It wasn't because they asked me to redo it, it's because I felt that the interview that we'd done was just an enormous quarrel, and it would be impossible for the audience to follow. You mentioned in your introduction an interview I'd done with Ram Jethmalani. I'm not talking about the one where he walked out, but there was one before that which actually got an Asian Television Award, where we were talking about the morality of a lawyer defending Manu Sharma. I was taking the actually logically indefensible position that you have no right as a lawyer to defend a man who's accused of rape, and in doing so, you're... Of murder, forgive me. And in doing so, you're letting down yourself and you're letting down principles. And actually, to be honest, my position was wrong, because his answer was, look, a lawyer has a duty to defend someone, and it is not for me to judge their innocence or guilt. And if I start taking moral positions, I'm letting down the legal profession. But the interview, when it was recorded, was nothing but a shouting match, and it lasted for 25 minutes. We shouted at each other. When it ended, I said, do you think we can do it again? Because I don't think anyone can follow what you've just said or what I've asked.
But that's the fashion today.
And we did it all over again and shouted again.
You were the trendsetter, and you didn't know you were the trendsetter.
Not at the time. I mean, I really thought it was too loud, and we just shouted, and we repeated it, and we shouted again. And when it ended, he was a gentleman. He said, Dekho yaar, chhad, drink pi mere naal.
Well, Karan, if we have time, I'm going to come back to some more colorful personalities. But first, why has your show been taken off air? Why, after 20 years, have you lost your captaincy?
It hasn't been taken off air. The truth of the matter is that the contract that I had with India Today Television ended in April. And when that contract ended, both of us felt that we were perhaps better no longer in each other's company. It wasn't a divorce.
You've so learned the art of political diplomacy that it's pointless interviewing you, Karan.
No, it's not, but I'm telling you the truth.
Why did Rajdeep get to keep his contract and not you?
Well, that's a question you have to ask Kali and Arun Puri to get their side and Rajdeep to get his. But I can honestly tell you that my contract didn't end, sorry, it wasn't terminated. It ended, and in fact, we continued for 14 days beyond the ending, simply because there was a shortfall of programming on my side that I had to fulfill. And we had agreed that perhaps in both our interests, it would make sense if we went our different ways. We, and this is no great secret, and I don't think they'll be offended at my saying it, looked upon programs, looked upon guests, looked upon subjects, looked upon questions in different ways. My belief in what I thought was the right thing for me to ask, the right subject to pursue, the right people to question, was different to theirs. And it became apparent to me, good 4 months before the contract ended, that we were not going to agree. And so I said to them, and they agreed readily. I don't think they were at all disheartened, leave aside heartbroken to hear this. I said to them, let's go our different ways when the contract ends.
So Karan, there's a public perception that your show or your contract was not renewed because you're not a great acolyte of Mr. Modi, and there's been quite a catharsis.
Are you sure? I thought Mr. Modi was particularly fond of me.
Well,
I mean, he said to me, and I told you a moment ago, brother, I love you. He also said, jab main Delhi aaunga, hum bhojan karenge.
But you haven't been invited for the bhojan. So
I think he's a little forgetful, that's all. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Modi will be in touch, and he'll say to me, maaf karna yaar, main bilkul bhool gaya tha. Maine socha tha ki tum London gaye ho.
Well, he's learned one thing from his interviews with you. He never says anything in 2 minutes anymore now. His Man Ki Baat is a full hour. But, jokes apart, Karan, the point I'm making is that there is this perception that a lot of editors and journalists who are not politically aligned have been shunted out of their positions of influence or power. So, one, are you going to accept that that might have been a motivation? And two, the question I want to ask is that, is it possible for journalists, in fact, to be, these great words that keep floating around of being neutral, of being politically unaligned? We are political beings. We may not be party acolytes, but you do stand for a certain set of political values. So is it possible for journalists to be neutral, or should they only be fair?
You asked two questions. The first is, do I believe that, in fact, pressure was brought to bear that ended my contract or led to the situation whereby India today didn't want to renew the contract? And honestly, to say yes would mean I'd have to say that someone like Arun Puri and Kali Puri fell under pressure from Mr. Modi. And would an editor as big with an empire as large as Arun Puri come under pressure from a politician? Come on. I think
Karan, you do know rhetorical questions aren't answers, right?
I mean,
I'm going to quickly show.
I honestly think your question casts aspersions upon the Puris, and I think that would be unfair to do. They have a magazine with a tradition that goes back 35 years, and India today has done enormous good work. And let's believe that a solid, committed journalist will stand up for press freedom and not bow under pressure from any government, be it Congress or BJP. And if they do, then I hope they do it silently and in their own hearts, and certainly in their own homes, are ashamed of what they've done. But your second question...
You do know you haven't answered my first question.
I said that if you think the contract was ended, you have to ask Arun Puri, because I don't believe Arun Puri comes under pressure.
So very clearly, you have you're not privy to any information that could lead you to surmise that.
I'm not privy to any information, but if you have, please tell me.
Okay.
I'd always love to have my eyes opened.
All right. I'll come back to a technique that I know you deploy, which I'm not deploying on you to your advantage, but carry on.
Your second question was, can journalists really be neutral as opposed to, because they're political beings, revealing what their political position is?
Political set of values is.
Let me put it like this. Beyond my political set of values, the questions that I ask, because I like to ask questions to the opposite of the position of the person I'm interviewing, already reveal a slant. But that's not my slant. That's the one I've adopted for the purpose of this interview. And therefore, if I was interviewing Arun Jethmalani, to take an example, my questions to him would suggest that his defenses of the economy were wrong, and I would be quoting the CPM or the Congress to substantiate my position. I'd be quoting statistics to undermine his position, and everyone would think Karan is passionately convinced the economy is doing extremely badly. The Modi government has failed to live up to all its promises. We have terrible problems, not just with growth, but with job creation. And your opinion of Karan from those questions would be he's desperately anti-BJP, probably personally anti-Arun Jethmalani. But then see me the next week interviewing, say, Mr. Chidambaram. And I would do exactly the opposite to him. I would put to him all the arguments which prove that the statistics you've dug up are actually not convincing, that there is a good argument to be made to show that growth is actually improving, that you left behind an economy that was not just stumbling but stuttering, and that the government has initially spent time building it up, and now those green shoots are about to flower. And therefore, if you judge Karan by the outcome of both interviews, you'd say there is a sense of neutrality he's established, because he is a sense of devil's advocate to both.
No, but Karan, the economy is a complex question on which you don't necessarily have to have, especially the one you're putting out as proof of your neutrality or your professionalism, is that you might question two sets of numbers or two sets of positions. But when I'm talking about political set of values, have you ever done a really hard interview with a congressman putting out Hindutva values as something that they should espouse, or that you're questioning them?
No,
why don't you follow Hindu majoritarianism?
Why would I ask
Have you ever done that?
No, I can do a tough question, a tough interview with a congressman without having to advocate that they follow Hindutva values. I can do a tough interview by saying to a congressman, your biggest problem is that the young heir apparent that you think is going to be the star and darling that will take your party to future success is considered by the rest of the country as Pappu. And Pappu is not a name, as in the case of Naveen Patnaik. It is a description in the case of Rahul Gandhi. And Pappu means, very simply, that people think, A, he hasn't got the talent to be prime minister, leave aside anything more important than that. Secondly, he's an appalling public speaker, and speaking is an essential credential in a politician. And third, most people think he hasn't got the persistence or the dedication to continue with the job for very long. He keeps fleeing to Italy or wherever for a little restful holiday. You can pursue the line of being Pappu very effectively and annoy them.
I would be a very unastute interviewer if I didn't feel that this is really welling up from inside.
Oh, let me tell you, if you detected a certain amount of passion that reveals my inner sentiment, I'm not going to hide from you that I am not the greatest admirer of Rahul's intelligence. Let me finish. I probably am a great admirer of his likable personality, but you can divorce and separate the two. A human being can be very likable and unintelligent, and you can be the opposite, extremely intelligent and very distasteful. And if someone asks me which is a better quality in life, likability is more important, I'd say, than intelligence. I'd rather be likable than considered intelligent, right? But unfortunately for Rahul, he's hugely likable, and when he's judged as a politician, people go by other criteria, and on those terms, he does tend to disappoint. Images can change, by the way, and let me add one last thing, because I know you're itching to interrupt me. I've actually done a Business Standard article last Monday that pointed out that Rahul's attempt at undermining Modi by using humor is not just clever, it's very effective. Let me tell you, when he converted Modi's slogan after the wire got stopped into saying, Shahzade ke bare, na main bolunga, na kisi ko bolne dunga, it was a very telling blow on Mr. Modi. When he said, Modi ji, quickly, President Trump needs another hug. It was a very clever way of conveying his message. And humor is effective because it ridicules. And when you ridicule persistently, you're knocking a man off an icon or a pedestal where you've placed him.
I'm beginning to understand the disadvantages of courtcy now. I'm not
Please be rude to me. I've been itching for it.
No, merely of not interfering and letting you have your full sentence. But, when you were talking about likability versus intelligence, and particularly in a political leader, would you talk of a personality inverse, where Mr. Modi is highly intelligent but not likable?
Actually, Mr. Modi is, as a human being, probably very easy to talk to and good company. And therefore, I wouldn't say he's unlikable, because if you'll permit me a moment, there is another side to Mr. Modi, which I've also written about in 2002 when I met him for the first time. I was interviewing the Sanchadrak for the BBC. We got in touch with Mr. Modi to say, would he give us a briefing? He invited me to his room, which happened to be those, effectively, they were the servants' quarters at the back of Akbar Road. And he'd just come back from some Middle Eastern country. He had a lot of lovely kaju stuffed with almonds, which he put on the table, and I finished them all off. And he suggested to me that instead of doing the hackneyed normal interview with the Sanchadrak, which is to question him from the left about his commitment to the Constitution, about his commitment to Hindu Rashtra and all those issues, he said, interview him instead from the right, about how the RSS is committed to social work, but there are X number of organizations that he named who've got a better reputation. Its biggest operation is in Kerala, but in fact the Muslims and the Christians have a much higher standing than the RSS does, that it believes in shakas, but the shaka attendance is steadily falling. And he said, attack him from that side, and you'll create an interview that is not just different, but one that will be deeply informative for me and others. And at that moment, as he briefed me, I was grateful for what he was saying. I was aware that he was suggesting something different, which if I could pull off, would be unique. And then I said to myself when I walked out, but it's for the BBC, and the BBC probably expects a very different interview, and this would be a bit strange. So I said to myself, let me go back to the conventional, and in the last 5 minutes, I'll try and do what Modi is suggesting. But interviews become quarrels, quarrels take up time, and I never got to those questions for the last 5 minutes, and I never did what he suggested. Now courtesy is taking up
too much time. Karan, answer my question.
If I had done what he was suggesting, not only would he have been likable, he would have been extremely eye-opening and helpful. And I said at that time that the Modi who briefed me...
Karan, this doesn't answer my question, because you not doing it doesn't make Mr. Modi any less intelligent or likable. The point is he suggested it. So my question to you is he an intelligent man and likable in your book? Or is he an intelligent man who's not likable? Or is he neither of the two?
He's definitely...
Yes or no?
He's an intelligent man and a likable man, but unfortunately he doesn't like me.
Karan, you do know you're on record, and this is going to get tweeted out, that Karan Thapar thinks Mr. Modi is both likable and intelligent, and only grouse you have against him politically is that he doesn't like you.
No, the words only grouse you have against him were yours.
Okay.
I didn't say that. I simply said he's an intelligent man and a likable man, but he doesn't like me.
Okay, so I asked...
I don't think Mr. Modi would disagree. I don't think he'd quarrel with being called intelligent. I'm sure he wouldn't quarrel with being called
But I never posed
likable.
those questions to you. Whether you're likable or intelligent is not the subject in question right now. So, Karan, I'm going to come back again to this question of political values.
What about this wonderfully explosive thing that you promised the audience about?
I'm coming to that. But before that, you know, I believe in the BBC, or he went on to be in the BBC. There was a man called John Burt who told you that all current affairs interviews have basically 4 sets of answers. Yes, no, don't know, don't want to tell. And you applied that principle to your interviewing all your life, where you basically tried to corner people into the yes and no position and did not allow them to say don't know or won't tell. And that has been your line of questioning. While you are universally applauded for the research you do, for the acumen with which you interview, very often life has more complex circumstances than a yes or no. Do you think, looking back on your career of interviewing, that in your own way you narrowed down the possibility of discourse, dialogue, understanding, and perspective by the kind of questioning you did in your interviews?
Without doubt. I'd have to be a prime bloody fool to say no, of course. But remember, I've got 25 minutes in which to do the interview. And I have a choice between allowing a long, reflective, thoughtful discussion to happen, which requires much more than 25 minutes, so it can never be encapsulated in that time space, or to tackle a subject and try and focus the mind of the interviewee in such a way that I get answers to what I'm asking. Because at the end of the day,
which very often corners them into positions that they actually don't want to hold, and our public life has narrowed down and fallen in its quality because no public figure is allowed to have complex positions.
No, Shoma, it corners them into positions that they don't want to reveal. People hold positions consciously. Politicians aren't jackasses who've made up their mind at the last moment about what they want to do because they flipped a coin and decided, well, it's landed that way, that's the way I'm going. No, they are well aware of what suits them, their party, and their perception of national interest, and they abide by it. But then they camouflage it because they know in presentational terms it may not work with X and Y, and sometimes it has to be sugar-coated to work with others. What I'm doing is stripping the sugar coating. And I'm doing it in a time limit of 25 minutes, which means I can't afford for him to waffle for too long. And the reason is
I'm being so courteous to you because I have a lot of questions to ask you.
The reason is because of courtesy for the audience. If I ask a question, I think the audience listening to the interview want an answer to that.
Yes,
and if I don't get an answer and I don't persist till I do, then I'm being discourteous to the audience.
I actually don't want to impersonate you right now, so just let me butt in
without.
Please
do.
Well, there's another question I want to come to too, and I'm going to ask them because you have a way of running away with the answer, is that your show, The Last Word, was meant to be an assessment of the media and the way it covers news. You started off really taking it on general trends of how the media is doing, but you had once expressed a desire to arrive at a situation where we could have very candid but constructive criticism of each other as professionals. Did you ever arrive at that position when you could candidly and constructively speak of personalities and their professionalism?
I think so.
Who have you criticized?
Obviously, you and others will have their own judgment. The difference between The Last Word and, say, Devil's Advocate, and both of them were Rajdeep's programs, is that Devil's Advocate was a one-to-one interview. And so I could afford to counter what was being said to me by my interviewee because he would have a chance to reply. The Last Word was a discussion where there were 3 or 4 people. And the object of a discussion is to bring to prominence multiple different contrasting viewpoints. And occasionally...
was it viewpoints, or was it to expose the predilections from which media was covering a piece of news?
Well, I'm not sure the two are necessarily as different as you make them out to be. Sometimes different viewpoints do end up exposing the predilection from which the media covers the news, because this suddenly makes audiences aware there are 3, 4 different ways of looking at the subject. So simply exposing different viewpoints achieves the purpose of exposing.
Sure.
But equally,
you had intended it eventually to have the kind of candidness with which you could respectfully and constructively discuss even personalities and people who embody a certain media position. So today, let me put you in the job.
I wouldn't want to discuss personalities. I don't think people come on my show to have their personality discussed. I'm happy to discuss and question the viewpoint they hold and that they represent and that they're defending or advocating. That's different to defending their personality. People have a right to their personality without having to be questioned, unless, of course, they've agreed to that. So when they came on my show for a current affairs program and a current affairs discussion, it was the view they held that I questioned, not their personality.
Sure. So right now, if I put you through the John Hurt principle and I ask you about the professionalism of some of your peers, would you give me the yes, no, don't know, want to tell answer? Let me start first.
Can
with
I be
Arnab
honest again? Can I
Goswami.
be honest again?
Yes.
You're asking me to talk about my peers, people who are not just my colleagues, but are also, in many cases, my friends. I'd be a fool if I said to you, honestly, I'm going to answer those questions. I'm talking about people who are my friends. There's no compulsion why I should have to stand up in public and actually ruin friendships just to be honest to you. So
Yes.
happily ask me the questions, but let the audience be aware, I will give polite, discreet answers where I think politeness and discretion is required.
Sure.
Right? Honesty in public is not a virtue, it's a bloody folly half the time.
Okay, you've clearly given your answer here. You know that you're not going to do this. I'm going to open this up to questions. While I'm looking
What
at...
about the great expose?
Oh, yes, there was
I
an
thought you wanted to
expose.
take my pants
Yeah,
off.
see, I've been so courteous to you that I've forgotten the expose.
This is strange. I'm reminding her to embarrass me.
You do know the reason Karan is so sanguinely reminding me of the exposés, because as I told you, the worst we can accuse him of is that he loves his mummy and enjoys his Sundays and wears shorts and doesn't shave.
That wasn't the expose. You had something else in
I'm
mind.
going to tell you. So, you know, some years ago, we had invited Woody Allen to an event in India, and he replied saying, I never go further west or east than 57th Street. And here is this great journalist, the man who has been skewering public life and public figures for many years. And when we invited him to Gurgaon, believe you me, it took me 3 weeks to convince him. And he said, that is way too wild and way too out there. I don't go to Gurgaon. Please release me before it is 8 o'clock because it is dangerous to be in Gurgaon.
Do you remember that song?
Is that a good explosive secret? Raise your hands.
Do you remember that wonderful song? It used to go, please release me, let me go, because I don't love you. I'm totally out of tune.
Karan, there's a codicil question to that.
Which is?
Which is that, again, as I said, because you have put so many people at the end of your barbecue stick, but you yourself have never occupied any position which involves any complexity or dilemma or, you know, just...
Those are wonderful euphemisms. What is a position that involves complexity and dilemma?
You didn't let me finish my question. So when you have been skewering people, has there been any interview where you felt awful for what you were doing because you could understand the complex position that person may have been in?
Many, many, many times.
So while I'm looking for questions, the audience wanted to...
And on many occasions when an interview ends, I go out of my way to try and find a way of being nice to make up for the fact that I was nasty, because I think I'm doing a job and I'm not necessarily a nasty person, but I can well understand if the person I've spoken to feels, God, this guy's a shit. And everyone's ego is important, mine is important, theirs is important, and when you know that you've asked questions
Karan,
that may have hurt them...
But Karan, isn't that itself a form of deception when you do a really hard interview for spectacle and for audience, and when the cameras are off, you'd make your damnedest attempt to make friends with that person? Isn't that deception?
You may call it deception, I call it being human. Most of us have a job to do and questions to ask, and you certainly do it, and you do it as persistently as you think the job requires. And if they're not getting answers, then you persist because you know there is a truth there that has to be revealed. And then afterwards, as a human being, you say, and maybe you may think it's contradictory, but I also don't necessarily like what I have to do, and I don't want to leave the person feeling upset, and so I do make an effort to be nice. And I make a point sometimes when I've been nasty to people, not just to be nice after the interview, but to write letters that don't apologize,
Karan,
but try and put a different gloss on the interview.
We are 2 minutes
but
past...
this is not an answer she wants, so she won't hear it.
Karan, you know now what it feels like to be the end of your interview stick. It's 2 minutes past your Cinderella time. I can feel...
No, I'm enjoying myself.
I can feel your fear barometer rising. You know, the wilds of Gurgaon are closing in on you. So let me ask...
If the wilds of Gurgaon are such wonderful people, let me with the wilds forever.
Now you know just how much of souffle underlay his hard interviews, you know.
And that's my favorite pudding, by the way.
So Lloyd Matthias wants to ask you that, is there any interview you would have liked to have done that you never got to do, and why?
Sonia Gandhi.
Faster,
Another one,
Karan, I'm losing
another
time.
one with Narendra Modi. Barack Obama. Donald Trump.
Okay.
Look, this is an endless list.
Yeah, we've got your sense. Have you done an interview of Rahul Gandhi ever, and can you give us some flavor of what it was like?
Promised several times, but he's never kept his promise.
he clearly knows you better than most politicians do. Has your journalistic style changed in the last 3 years due to the new political dispensation? Please be honest.
No, but because of age, yes, I'll be honest. Definitely because of age. As you get older, you slow down. Some people think you get nicer. I just think I become more boring.
Was Mr. Modi's 2.5-minute interview with you televised? If not, then I would like to know what he said to you, Anand Kumar.
You've already got the answer.
Yeah. What was your question to Kapil when he's, okay, these are all online, so I'm not going to, you can look up both the Kapil interview and the Modi interview online. Just one last question, Kapil and Karan, and you need to do this really fast.
What about the expose?
The expose was your fear of coming to Gurugram.
That wasn't the expose. Can I be honest with you? She said to me when I was over there,
okay,
I'm so glad you're in Delhi. I thought you were in South Africa. And I said to her, what you're really asking me, Shoma, is am I having an affair with Anuljit Singh? And I said to her, please ask me when we're over there. And she promised she wouldn't. She's let me down. And the truth is that there was a little tailpiece in the Bombay Mirror, if that's what the paper's called, which claimed that a senior Indian journalist had now decided to go and live in South Africa with a friend of his who is a very important businessman who had acquired large wine vineyards in South Africa. And this senior important businessman had come to India to tell his family that he was going to go live there. And it's utterly and totally untrue. And the saddest part is that Manu, Anuljit, is one of my closest friends who's been saying to me for the last 7 years, why don't you come and visit South Africa? You've never seen the country. And now I can never go, because if I go, the world will be convinced the story's true.
But, Karan, as every adult in this audience knows, that closest friend is a great euphemism, so it's a great stand-in.
Sweetheart, not with a sardie, for God's sake. Not with a sardie. Accuse me of anything else, but I'm a Dosco. How do you kiss them? Sorry, and that's a very Doon School reply. I do apologize. Part of me hasn't grown up, as you can see.
Okay, Karan, I'm just going to take one last minute because you've hijacked this platform to get your own little gossip clarified. I didn't ask you about that. But, the Talwar, Karan, the Talwar judgment has just come out. And I think it's a slap on literally pretty much every media house in this country. What do you think about criminal defamation? The fact that people should have recourse to criminal defamation against journalists. And two, when media so egregiously crosses the line, like when we have television channels surrounding Mr. Shashi Tharoor's house, calling him a murderer, and it's like a commando operation. They've got him cornered and surrendered. What do you think can be the answer for how we stop egregious behavior on the part of the media?
How the media treated the Talwars and how the media treated and is still treating Shashi Tharoor is indefensible. And not for a moment would I defend it.
No, I said, what's the answer to it?
And I do believe every individual does have recourse to criminal defamation against journalists as well. Journalists are not barred from being sued for criminal defamation. I suppose at the end of the day, the best defense against such shoddy, indefensible journalism is for you people who read papers to say, I'm damned if I'm going to pick up this paper if this is how it continues. I will not watch this channel if this is how it continues. Nothing will stop us. Nothing will stop us more than knowing that we have no readership and no viewership for this appalling standard. But as long as you give us the feeling that you're going to watch it, sadly, and I'm not sharing the blame with you, but you're encouraging us. You have to stop us from being the monsters we can be.
And on that note, we really have to end. There was one question I wanted to ask Karan, which is that because he belongs to Lutyens Delhi and he thinks that coming to Gurugram is a real health hazard, a life hazard, I wanted to ask him whether he epitomizes what the right wing accuses liberal journalists of being, which is of being Lutyens elites, having no connection with reality on ground, and belonging to an ecosystem of power and privilege, which does not expose them to much complexity. Karan, this is the wonderful rhetorical question on which I'm going to end. You can answer that over cocktails with everybody else. We have a 20-minute break, and then we are back with a crackling session that I'm sure all of you are waiting for. Thank you very, very much, Karan.
Thank you very, very much, Shoma.